And now you've got this kind of wave of AI coming along as well. Well, what's that going to mean? How's that going to live in collaboration with humans? Well, I think of it as this is going to just make humans even more able to focus in on exactly those skills, give you the skills, the knowledge, the direction that you need, and what like any good coach would do, any good mentor would do for you. So I believe that when you look at the trends, we're heading in that direction, but we're not out of the woods yet, honestly, because if this was easy to solve, you would have seen the trends of people being disengaged start going the opposite direction, but it's not.
Welcome back to the Human Capitalist Podcast. I am Trent Cotton, your host and human capitalist, and today I've got Robin Daniels as my guest. I found Robin because I was scrolling through LinkedIn and just this person came on talking about leadership, and I was like, oh my God, I got to know more. So Robin, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Trent. You're not the first one to say that. I had an investor say, I think I see more of you, Robin, in my LinkedIn feed than I see my mother. So maybe I overshare.
No, not at all. Not at all. It's good stuff. I mean, if you were oversharing like some of the people on LinkedIn do about like their relationships and stuff, it'd be a completely different story. So,
fair.
Well, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience?
No, thanks for having me. Honestly, I was super excited when you reached out. I've been following you for a bit as well, and kind of see some of the good stuff that you put out there. And so my career is basically, I've been over 20 years in high tech. I think of myself as a business leader. I spent most of my career in marketing. When I was 21, so I'm originally from Copenhagen, Denmark, where I was born and raised.
Okay.
And then when I was 21, I bought a one-way ticket from Copenhagen to California. I didn't have a job or a place to stay.
That's bold.
I didn't know a single person. And I wanted to be in tech. I'm a nerd, and I wanted to kind of be where all the nerds were. And at that point in time, this was in 2000, Silicon Valley was kind of the place to be. So I went over there with the hopes and dreams of, can I make it in tech? I didn't want to look back on my life being young and naive and maybe not having a lot to lose. I didn't want to look back on my life when I was 50, 60, 70 years old and regret not having the courage to go. So I flew over there, figured I'm going to give it a shot. Ended up getting a job. I applied to every job I could find in these startups. I just was using Craigslist. For those of you who knows what Craigslist is, that was how I applied for jobs. So I applied to every job I could find, and I ended up getting probably 15 job interviews or so. And I was going all over Silicon Valley and the beauty about Silicon Valley, which I still love to this day, is that it doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, kind of in your educational background to some extent. So I always just show up with kind of energy, excitement, conviction. They're willing to take a chance on you at the very most junior level, of course, maybe not so much at the senior level. Long story short, I ended up getting a job at a startup company, and I was super excited. A few weeks of having been in Silicon Valley, I got a job. And then a month after I got there, in March of 2000, the whole market crashed. And I was like, oh, shit. And so this company I was at did not end up making it. Long story short, I ended up spending over 2 decades of my career in Silicon Valley. And not everything I did turned to gold. I had a lot of mistakes and kind of failures, which I write a lot about on LinkedIn, which I think gets a lot of traction. But I also had some good wins. I was early days at Salesforce. I was at Box, helping them go public. I was at LinkedIn for a while. I was at WeWork when that went through skyrocketing growth and an epic crash. I was at Matterport most recently in a company that I took public in 2021, which was fun. And then now I'm at a company called Sensei, which is an HR tech platform, really focused on empowering people to be the best that they can be. And I run marketing and product and kind of go to market at this company. But the most of my career has been in marketing. I've been a chief marketing officer at several companies.
Nice. That's quite the story. And it's always funny to me just how, if you were to look at that like on LinkedIn, you kind of go, okay, what the hell is this guy doing? But that's why, in my recruiting days, I would always just pick up the phone and go, okay, what's your story? Because what I see on paper does not make sense. And that 9 times out of 10, there was some kind of thread that they were able to sew through each different experience that built on the other. So I love, always like asking the Genesis question of going, okay, how did you get here? Because there's always such great lessons along the way.
Totally. Well, it's also, this is one of the issues I have with LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn. I use it a lot, this platform. I can't imagine a world without it, to be clear. It's transformed my life, my relationships. And whenever I go on there, yes, there's a lot of crap content, but the majority of people want to put out good content. And it's kind of like a mini TED Talk. But But the reason why I have an issue sometimes with LinkedIn is because it makes it seem like everybody's career is just up and to the right at all points in time.
Right.
It's just not that way. I mean, life is hard. I always feel like you take 2 steps forward and then you get smacked in the face. Something happens. You get laid off, or this company doesn't work out. Funding falls through. A customer's pissed off. There's a lot of stuff that, obviously don't put all the time, because it's hard to like, how would you describe that? But as I've gotten older, certainly, and think more about relationships and the people around me, everybody has stories like this. I'm sure you have tons of stories like that.
Oh, yeah.
Of the failures that have made you into the person that you are today.
Yeah. And it's funny. I remember, this was 2010 or something. I had my own consulting, and then, the market was continuing to constrict, and I had a family I needed to provide for. And so I went back into recruiting, and I went to go work for someone who we were colleagues at a previous institution. And whenever I left the previous institution, I had this big fancy title. I don't even remember what it was. He did. And he goes, well, I can't offer you that. All I can offer you is this. And I said, look, I don't care what my title says. I care what my check says. That is more, you can call me a janitor as long as you're giving me what I need to cover my bills and
That's right.
pay me for a good day's work, then I'm okay with that. So, the titles out there too, or something else on LinkedIn. I'm like, what the hell is this?
Totally. It's kind of like what I always say, I write about this topic a lot, that I think if you have the option and the privilege in your life to be able to have choice in your career, go choose something that you're passionate about, that you love doing, right? But I'm not naive. I know that sometimes you just got to pay the bills. I've also had jobs where, hey, 2 months before I had my kid in 2006, I got laid off. I was like, panic, like, how am I going to support this kid that's about to come into the world in 2 months? I would probably take any job that would come my way at that point in time, right? And
make it work.
Of course. And you can find joy in that too, because there's joy in just the survival and providing for other people. But if you do have the choice, go find something where you're so excited and happy about it. This has become my North Star and passion in life, is I want to do whatever I can to give people that little nudge and motivation towards something that's meaningful. Because I know that the energy you unleash when you show up every day with passion, energy, excitement, conviction is second to none, versus going into a job where you're kind of phoning it in, right? But we've all been there. That's why I get it. But it's like, don't you want to live in a world where everyone is like extremely motivated to solve the challenges that we have? It would be amazing.
My personal rule is that when my feet hit the floor, if I'm not excited about the job, then it's time for me to look for something. If there's not a problem for me to solve, or something that I'm just really jazzed about, even if it's just the people that I work with. Sometimes that's all you have is like, I don't like the work, I don't like the company, but I love the people I work with. Find something to kind of cling to.
What is how long do you give yourself in that situation when you're feeling that there's something kind of amiss? Because it comes and goes in life, right? 6 months? Yeah, that's a good. Yeah, that's kind of my barometer as well.
I kind of treat it like relationships, which, thank God I've been more successful in my career than I have in relationships. But, there were so many that I stayed in way too long. And I think I went too far to the right on the career side of going, especially early in my career, I'm like, screw this, I'm not doing this. And I would leave. But there was a lesson that had I stayed, I could have learned. And I'm a very firm believer that if you don't learn the lesson now, life will throw it back at you, and it's going to be even harder to learn the next time. So learn it the first time, right?
That's damn good advice.
I told my daughter, just please, there are 3 pieces of advice. If you just follow these and don't make the same mistakes that I did, go be creative, make your own.
Yeah. Totally.
So in this podcast, kind of my thing is, I've never really been an HR person. I've been a business person who sits in HR. I came from the line of business. So I look at human capital as being the role that is in charge of the largest asset, producing revenue, and also the largest expense. So that's kind of the lens that I look at this particular function within the organization. So with that in mind, like looking forward, what changes are you expecting or watching for or predicting in the next, let's just say 1 to 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, you're not wrong. 70% of all capital spent in a company on average is on people, right? And so you think about, that is a lot of money. We're talking trillions and trillions of dollars for companies around the world. Yet you also find, and when you look at the data, that 65 to 70% or so of people want to quit their jobs. They're unhappy in their jobs.
Yep.
And the reason why, when you dig deep into the data of why they're unhappy and want to quit their jobs, is because they feel stuck. They don't feel like they're not progressing towards anything that's inspiring to them. They're not learning anything new. They're not getting the skills that they need that is challenging them, and they feel like they're just kind of treading water. And again, like we just talked about, we've all been there at times. It's fine. It's kind of part of life. But it also means that those 70% of people or so, they're probably showing up every day not doing the best work of their life. Yeah, we also know that companies, the data from Gallup and McKinsey and others, the data shows that companies who have figured out how to deeply motivate and engage their employees and give them purpose and meaning in a path, they see much better innovation and ideas coming out from those employees, which of course is really what is required in a company. You think about the companies you've worked for, certainly the ones I've worked for, all an organization, all a company is a group of people coming together to solve challenges. Sometimes those are small everyday things, and sometimes they're really big things, right, that you need to solve. And so the data shows that companies who have figured out how to motivate people, they see better innovation output, and they outperform their peers in terms of growth and profitability as well. So it's a no-brainer. And honestly, this is not rocket science, Trent. If you go and speak to most CEOs, which I spend a lot of time with, they would go, oh, yeah, people are our most important assets, the thing we care about most. But then because they don't know exactly how to unlock their full potential, what happens? They go back to chase whatever they've always been chasing, which is revenue and profit and growth, and so at all costs. And so you end up in this kind of dichotomy where either the company has succeeded, but the people are kind of miserable, or you also have seen the reverse, where sometimes you have organizations where people are happy, but the companies are suffering. My thesis is, and what I write about a lot, is that for the future, it has to be that company success has to equal human success. And what I mean is that you can't have one way, like the idea that the company's doing great and the people are suffering is not success. Yes, of course, we've seen as a company, you can do that short term, but long term, people are going to leave the moment something better comes along, right? And the reverse is also true. You can't have an organization where people are thriving and having fun and high-fiving each other and free lunch every day, but the company is not performing, right? That's not success either. And so the way that you unlock it, if you then want to dig into what you could do as an organization or as a leader, HR leader or CEO, you have to figure out how do you get people on a path to give them the skills, the knowledge, the insights, the drive that they need to see success in their own lives. And so if you think about coming back to take this from a personal perspective, I am where I am today 100% because so many people along the way have invested in me. Whether that's been a boss or a teacher or even a peer or maybe a family member who've kind of seen something in me and said, hey, you should do this, or you're good at this, or actually you should maybe invest a little bit of learning this because you're not that great. Oh, I've had so many people in my life who've done that. I'm sure you probably have too. Most people who get to our stage of life probably have, who have seen success. And so I want us to create a movement around how can we provide this for every single human being on the planet. This is kind of my North Star and what I'm fighting for. And part of that is leadership and culture and environment. How do you provide an environment where people can thrive? And that's not to say it's easy. Easy and thriving are not the same thing, but how do you provide an environment where people can thrive? And at some point, you also need, of course, technology to enable that as well. You need to give people the tools and so on. And of course, we as a company, the company I work for called Sensei, we provide an HR tech platform that is focused on human success. And we're not the only company out there talking about this. Many companies talking about how do you unlock this. But our thesis is you have to give people the knowledge, skills, and empowerment every single day to do incredible work. And so you have to hold them accountable. You have to give them clarity on their goals that they need to achieve. You need to give them the skills that they need to learn every single day. But you also need to create a great team environment where people feel like they belong and they're part of something bigger than themselves. And so ultimately, the future is heading in that direction. If you ask the next generation, I have an 18-year-old, and if you ask Gen Z and of course millennials as well, many of them have been talking about purpose for a long time. They don't want to just go and have a job where they can kind of work for the man, and just make a paycheck. They actually want to make a difference, which I think is a beautiful thing. And now you've got this kind of a wave of AI coming along as well. Well, what's that going to mean? How's that going to live in collaboration with humans? Well, I think of it as this is going to just make humans even more able to focus in on exactly those skills, give you the skills, the knowledge, the direction that you need, and like any good coach would do, any good mentor would do for you. so I believe that when you look at the trends, we're heading in that direction, but we're not out of the woods yet, honestly, because if this was easy to solve, you would have seen the trends of people being disengaged start going the opposite direction, but it's not. The last 10 years, it's held steady at about 65 to 70% of people in any given organization are pretty unhappy. And so
Wow.
I mean, it terrifies me when I think about that number. I'm like, that's not the world that's going to solve all these massive issues that we have, right?
Yeah. And what's funny is that whenever, I'm sure you talk to organizations like I do, and they go through the survey results and they go, well, there's just 20% that are real detractors. And I said, okay, but there's a silent 50% that they're not telling you where they stand. Those are the ones that you need to be worried about, not the happy 20%, not the bottom, 25% that are miserable. It's that in between that's going to get you screwed.
Totally. This is why a key part of what we focus on is we have this thing that we think that the heartbeat of a good relationship between you and your manager and you and your peers is kind of a weekly check-in where you can, and however you want to do it, whether that's Teams or Slack or email or something, where you basically check in and you say what's working and what's not working, and calling out people who are making a difference in your life. And the reason why that ends up mattering so much is because, number one, it creates a much more transparent relationship with you and your manager. Again, coming back to just where we are in our lives, I mean, I come from the world where you do like performance reviews once a year, and then you'd sit down and you'd have. It was a very anxious time of year where I would sit and try to remember all the things that I did, and I would try to fluff it up like a pillow to make myself look good. And then I'd go into that conversation. And I'm sure now being on the other side as a manager is also kind of anxiety inducing, because I have to like sit there and critique this person. Like, what a shitty way of doing it, right?
It really is.
And so it's really hard to action anything that happened 9 months ago. I was like, and so I actually did a LinkedIn survey. This is probably maybe 6 months ago, where I asked people, and I have a decent following, so I think the sample size is decent enough. I asked, how often do you want feedback from your manager? Yearly, quarterly, monthly, or weekly? And most people by far said weekly or monthly, because then you can calibrate and course. So the idea that we have is, if you can do this kind of check-in every single week with your peers and your manager, then it changes the relationship. So for example, now that we do this in our company, what I found is that it makes me a much better leader, because I instantly can diagnose and be of service to my team. So when I find out that Thomas is doing well here, but he's struggling here, I can go, hey, Thomas, I see you're struggling with some things. How can I help you? What can I unblock for you? How can I help you refocus, versus me finding out at the end of the quarter and going, Thomas, what the hell didn't you do your job? Why did you miss this KPI, right? Or, hey, Susan, I see you did really well here, but this one here is not so working. Let me figure out like how I can insert myself maybe and guide you in a better direction, or get you the help that you need to be successful. And the relationship that we have created with our peers and our employees have just changed dramatically. But it also, the final thing is, it really provides a sense of belonging, because it feels like you're being heard. As a manager or as an employee, it feels like people are listening and my voice matters, and I'm seeing instant improvement from the things that I'm saying, versus, like to your point, you get this yearly thing, and then this yearly survey kind of goes into the ether. I don't really know. Of course, people feel disengaged because they feel like nobody's listening. I mean, is it any surprise, right? So of course not. So we want to create a world where it's much more around the closeness of the relationship between you and your manager, so you could become the best that you can be, getting the skills and knowledge that you need, but the direction that you need, in order for every single day you feel like you're on the road to mastery. It's a little bit kind of built on the idea of, the atomic habits, which is about every single day you get it slightly better. It's not like these hero movements where from one day to the other you become tremendous. It's like every single day can you do these small things that push you in a direction where you become better and better and better.
No, it makes complete sense. I remember early on, whenever I was studying to learn how to play the piano, I would get so frustrated because I would try to get through the end of an entire song without any kind of mistakes. And I would, I'd shut down, because I'm a little bit of an overachiever. But then whenever I just said, hey, I just want to get this measure right, and I would get that measure right, and then I'd go on to the next one. I achieved the same goal in less time with higher accuracy and higher quality. So, to your point of, getting at the end of the year or even at the end of the month and saying, hey, Robin's not doing what he's supposed to do. Well, it shouldn't be a surprise, if you're not, given the support and everything that you need. And, I think this is really where, kind of that human capital piece can really come in and kind of play that dual coach. So coaching the employee, coaching the manager.
That's right.
And, with AI potentially taking over some of the job functions, how do you see the support for employees that might be transitioning into new roles or needing to acquire new skills? Like, how do you see that happening in the near future?
There are a couple of things that we do, and we take two different kind of perspectives on it. But just to comment on yours, I mean, I never learned how to play piano or any instrument, and I honestly, I admire people who can, because I know how much like discipline. Like I can do a few things on a piano, but it's just like I would get frustrated. Like, it's too hard, right? And
well, don't get too impressed. I can read music, but I play by ear a lot, so don't get too impressed. I'm not that good.
I'm into running more, but it's the same. So when I turned 35, I ran my first marathon, and it was so hard, and it took so much training to get there. But it also taught me so much about myself. It's really about two things: about accountability and commitment. I think it's like you commit to something, and then you have to hold yourself accountable. Because I assume, if I think about my circle of friends, every single one that I know, they know exactly what it takes to be healthy, to sleep perfectly every night, to eat the perfect food, to have the perfect body. Yet they're not, obviously, right? Because there's a difference between knowing and actually doing it. So I think that commitment and accountability, and then when you set yourself these goals, then taking these micro movements every day, whether to learn piano or run a marathon, it's like you have to, because you can't. If you skip too much of it, you're not going to be ready for it. You're never going to make progress, and you're constantly going to feel frustrated. But your question on AI, so there's kind of two lenses that I think about. One is, what can we do for managers to become the best they can be? How do we coach and guide them? So, for example, when people do this weekly check-in using our platform, what happens on the side of the manager, when I get a notification from my employees and I can see what they've written, what worked well and what didn't work so well, and where they need help, instead of thinking that we want AI to replace humans, that's not the side of history that I want to be on. I want to use AI to become the superpower for humans to be the best that they can be. So what we do for managers is we come up with a little prompt that says, based on what Thomas said, here's how you could respond. Here's the tone you could use, the level of empathy, some response to what he's actually saying. It'll give you some guidance on this, right? And then you can either try to do that verbally the next time you see Thomas, or you can also just write it as a response in the prompt, kind of in Teams or in Slack and so on, right? So you can then write that back. We want to use AI to kind of guide you, because a lot of people especially first-time managers, if everything is easy when everything's going great, but when things are not going great, that's usually when you get put to the test. I certainly was for me when I first became a manager. So we think of, can we use AI to listen for the clues and the wording choices and the tone of voice to help the manager become knowledgeable and skillful and empathetic and compassionate in kind of guiding that employee through whatever they're going through. And over time, of course, as somebody uses that more and more, we can learn how to calibrate that based on the relationship that the manager and the employee has. So that's kind of the manager side of things. And it's working, honestly, really, really well. This on the employee side, the individual contributor side, what we think about is, how do we give people the knowledge, the skills, the motivation, clarity, and connections that they need every single day to progress towards a goal that's exciting for them. So let's say you're a marketing manager today, and your goal maybe in the next 5, let's say 10 years, is to become a VP of marketing for brand. Okay, fair enough. That's a common path. Or I'm a sales manager and I want to become a director of sales in the next 4 years. Okay, great. But what our platform will do is it'll lay out a path for you. We call this a human success journey. We'll lay out a path for you that says, here are the skills that you need to acquire, so you can then take certain courses. Here is the learning you need to develop. Here are the relationships that you should have. Here are some people in your organization you should go talk to who already have that skills. We can map up the skills on each person in your organization. So here are the skills that Kathleen has. Go talk to her, because she's actually really good at sales and human relationships and public speaking. So you should maybe go learn, because if you want to become a sales leader, maybe you need to learn some of the skills that Kathleen has. So we call this a human success journey. So we want to basically take an individual's journey and map it out based on what you want to become. Whether that's going to take 1 year, 5 years, or 10 years, map out that journey for you But that means that suddenly you have the guidance and motivation to every day get the skills and knowledge that you need to be successful. And again, the mental model that we use is kind of that of a mentor coach. But maybe the first time you do this, you put in, I want to become a VP of sales one day. Maybe the first iteration is like 70, 80% there. Here's what we think of you. But of course, the more we learn about you as a person, we can calibrate that. But that's honestly what a good coach would do. The first time I meet you, Trent, I'm like, I'm going to give you some more generic advice. The more I learn about you and your life and what's your background is and what you're good at and not good, I can calibrate my advice to you. So once we've known each other for maybe a few months, spend time together, the advice I'm giving you is like 99.9% dialed in because I know enough about you and your strengths and what gives you energy and joy and motivation. We want to be the platform that does that for every single person. And so that's, we call this the human success journey. And it's powered by this thing we call the human success score. And the human success score is kind of like, it's borrowed honestly from like Strava or Apple, where you have your rings, or on Strava, you can kind of see how you progress towards something. Because I think so oftentimes in HR technology in general, or in companies, we overcomplicate this with all kinds of different metrics and so on. Like, how do we give every single person and every single team and every single manager a score for how their team is doing, their department's doing, and overall for how their company is progressing? So this score, let's say your journey is to become a VP of sales in the next 4 years, okay? Here's this path you're taking. We can then every single week give you a score on how you're progressing toward that. It's kind of like, again, if you're learning to play piano or running a marathon, because what happens is if I'm going to train for a marathon in the next 6 months, the way you get there is you show up consistently week after week, and you do your training, you follow your training plan, like every 3 or 4 days, you do a run or something, or you run 3 or 4 times a week. And if you end up skipping quite a few, for whatever reason, maybe you're sick or maybe your motivation is there, the likelihood of you actually being able to complete that marathon is going to be fairly low. So it also puts a little bit the onus back on the employee. Like, we're going to give you the plan, the guidance to get to where you want to go, but you of course also have to at some point decide. But the goal, of course, is if the plan is there for you and the goal is exciting enough, then you're going to show up every day and you're going to work your ass off to get there, because you know that the future is going to be laid out for you in a way that's motivational and inspiring for you. I know that's a lot that goes into that, but hopefully that makes sense.
No, it does. It does. And are you able to track, the first thing I would probably want to track in a before and after would be retention, because I think that, yes, people leave managers, but I think they also leave because the journey that they want to take, they do not see a path at the organization that they're at. And I would say maybe 50% of the time the journey's there. It's just no one has really kind of articulated it. Is that what you're seeing with some companies in the market?
You're absolutely nailed it. That's exactly what we think of retention as being a key part of this. But one of the key goals that we have with this idea of the human success score is that we actually want to give HR leaders, chief people officers, a seat at the table. For so long, they honestly haven't really had, the sales leader comes into an organization or executive meeting or board meeting with the growth numbers. Here are the bookings numbers or the ARR numbers. The CFO comes in with how much cash we have in the bank, and the chief product officer comes in with, here's what we're launched lately and here's the adoption numbers and this. But what you have in HR are kind of these lagging metrics. Retention is a good one. It's super important, but it's always kind of looking backwards, right? It doesn't give you any trajectory of future performance, which is, again, if you follow the Strava model or the Apple model, that will actually project out into, based on your baseline fitness, how you're going to perform in the future. So in HR, you oftentimes have these lagging indicators like retention or ENPS is another great one, super important. One I'd take away. But the reason I think that HR doesn't have a seat at the table because they're not giving the board any indication of whether or not we're going to perform well in the next quarter or 2 or 3. What we want to do is, like, if your team is showing up and their human success score is high because they're leveling up their skills, they're connecting well with their peers, they're collaborating well across teams, right? These are all like small factors underneath that make up whether or not you actually are doing the work and becoming human success like first. Then that will add up to, we can correlate that to business performance. Are people staying longer? Are people performing better? Are we hitting better metrics and so on? It's a very hard one to do, and I don't think we've nailed it perfectly, but that exactly is the goal, is that the more data we have on how people are performing and showing up, after month and quarter after quarter, you can start correlating that to business performance in a way that's super meaningful for the organization. So it becomes a forward-looking indicator, not just a backward-looking indicator.
Yeah, I spend a lot of time explaining the difference between leading and lagging. And I guess that comes from my days as a lender in sales. Looking at what closed at the end of the month, I can't really change that. But I can tell you, looking at my pipeline, probably what I'll close over the next 90 days. Right. And there's so many things out there now, behavior cues. There's some predictive indicators that I think because of the amount of data that HR sits on that has no clue what to do with. I think now with AI, there are some things in there. So yeah, like looking at the score you indicated, but then too, also doing a retro and looking and seeing why are people leaving? What were their activities before they left? And then having an agent sit in and go, hey, I think you probably need to check on Robin. All indications is he's going to resign. And I think I've told the story before on the podcast, but whenever I worked for a large international institution, we implemented Visier, which is HR analytics. Yeah. And this was back in, I want to say 2016, 2017. They had a predictive turnover report. And so what we did is we went back for a year and pulled it up like it was that day and see who it predicted. And then just kind of did for 12 months to spot check to see how accurate it was. And it was 88%, and then it jumped up to 92% after we used it for another year. And that was just it going and pulling in historical data. It wasn't like we told it anything. And funny story is whenever I went to go and resign, my boss, she knew that I was entertaining another offer because we were in the middle of a merger. But whenever I called and actually resigned, she laughed. She goes, your name came up on the predictive report today. And when we started using that though, and sitting down as a talent person, I was able to say, hey, we've got some potential issues here. I know these are your top performers. So what's our strategy for retaining them? These are the bottom 20%. We're actually okay if they leave. It'll take care of stuff, but let's go ahead and start. How are we going to replace them? Is it internal? Are we going to upskill or do we need to go external? And so, our retention time went up, but then also too, the vacancy went down because we were able to fill a lot quicker. So, I think having something like, the human success score and just some kind of a finger on the pulse of the organization will move HR into more of the human capital. Because to your point, why should we have a seat at the table if we're not really providing value?
But that example you just gave is a game changer. Think about if all companies had that level of fidelity and accuracy into their performance. It's amazing. But most don't, right? They're pretty much stuck in, they think of HR as being something that takes care of compliance needs, meaning do people get paid? Are people taking their vacation? Are they certifying themselves, like taking their GDPR training or sexual harassment training, cybersecurity? But they're kind of taking care of the basics, not really thinking about how do we level them up. But imagine if everyone had what you were just talking about. It would be in a different situation when it came to human capital completely.
It is. Well, because you're looking at it, from a business standpoint. Just again, we've been using sales as an example. Whenever I managed large teams, I had a certain number in my head that as soon as that pipeline got even close to that balance, I was ringing the doorbell going, hey, we got top of the funnel issues. So, what's our plan? How are we going to do this? And I remember several times the team's like, that's 90 days away. I said, that will be here before we know it. I don't want to deal with this in 90 days. I want to deal with it today. That's why it's so urgent. And I think that, if HR can start leveraging some of these tools to be able to go on the offense, I think that's really going to give them that seat. They will have earned that right to sit at the table.
We've been very inspired by, I don't know if you know the Gainsight, who kind of recreated the idea of customer success. And Nick Mehta there, he's been the CEO at Gainsight for over a decade, and he's a phenomenal leader. Over $1 billion in value. They create the category of customer success, and basically the metric you use in customer success is NRR, net revenue retention, right? Which how much is the company spending today versus how much will they spend in the future. But there's really a lot that goes into that underneath the covers, churn and renewal rates, even such a thing as the customers using the product. What about their NPS on the product? But they've been able to come up with a single number that gives us an indication of how we're trending as a business going forward. NRR, right? Just like you have ARR in sales
Wow.
and so on.
Yeah.
And so we're very inspired by that. Like, how do we? Because I think so often we've overcomplicated the issue in HR. We've like used too many different numbers, and you look at it all, you go like, yeah, but tell me how we're going to do in the next. Because as a leader, especially as a C level or as a board level, you're thinking about the next 12 to 18 to 36 months, really. You're not just thinking about today, like, tell me how we're going to perform in the future, you know?
Right.
And HR's really struggled, I think, for the longest time to be able to have a coherent story around this. I mean, maybe for some of the companies I've worked with, I worked at LinkedIn for a while. They had an amazing talent analytics team. So they actually had some of that, but there was a lot of work in spreadsheets and pulling data from different sources and trying to do some analytics on what people were saying and so on, right? But a lot of companies don't have that. So how can we give them something that is much simpler and easier to understand that you can both use to drive the urgency in the organization, but also, of course, at the board level? Think about, we're also very inspired by this idea of streaks, you know, in consumer technology, whether you use Duolingo or Snapchat or whatever it is. Yeah. You get on a streak, right? And you want to make sure you don't break that streak. Well, imagine if your company is like doing really well, and then suddenly your human success score drops. Because most executives are competitive. They'll be like, all hands on deck. We've got to figure out what's happening, right? We want this to spur action, not just be informational, but actually spur action. Just kind of like, if you see in your Apple Watch that suddenly your fitness is going in the toilet, you're going to be like, I need to make some drastic changes in my life. You know, we want the same. We want this to be a catalyst for action. So actually, you become the best performing culture you can be.
And it makes sense because the kind of the post that really kind of drew me to you were talking about the leadership success culture, and you defined it as input, output, and outcome. And I'd love for you to kind of walk us through the just unpack that because there was a lot there in that little clip that I watched.
Let me try to explain it simply and elegantly. It basically comes from the fact that I think we've come from a world where the only thing that mattered was outcome, goals. Like, are you hitting your goals or not? How you get there, honestly, didn't really matter as much. And I think what it has created, honestly, is a world or a culture in corporate America and corporations around the world where there's a lot of toxicity because you're encouraging behaviors that are not aligning with the values you espouse so often. And I've seen this, honestly, time and again, you know, these kind of brilliant jerks that we've all heard about, the assholes who are coming in and they're really good at what they do, but they're just kind of like a neutron bomb for your culture, and everybody leaves because of them. And so the cancers. The cancers, exactly. And too often, even in my life, honestly, I've tolerated them because I was worried about performance of the business, not really knowing in the early days that the business is going to underperform because you have that person, right? Even though they're brilliant in some ways, they're not. So the new formula for success and accountability, I call it input plus output equals outcome. So it used to be outcome was the only thing that mattered. Now I think it's about input plus output equals outcome. What I mean is that an input is something that you control 100%. The way you show up every day, the way that your behaviors are aligned to the mission of the company, the energy, the conviction, the purpose that you show up with every single day. So for example, I see all these companies, I've worked in a ton of them, but I've also advised several companies, and they always have these posters on the wall. We're accountable. We get shit done. We care about customers, blah, 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 right? But there's really no accountability towards those values. Have you ever seen that? Really not.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And so you create these toxic environments. And so an input is the way that people show up every day, the way people hold themselves accountable to the values that you have, the energy, conviction, collaboration, communication that you have. And it's something you control 100%. It's not easy because if you get cut off in traffic, or you're late for a meeting, or you miss the train in the morning, it might color your day. It doesn't change the fact that the way you show up in your first meeting and when you walk into the office, you control that 100%. So that's number one. Number two is an output. And so what's an output? An output is something that you put out there in the world. It could be a new HR policy. It could be a new sales spiff. It could be a new marketing campaign. Right? It could be a lot of different things, new product release. And you can look at that objectively, I think, in many ways, and say, is this best in class? How does this compare to what we're seeing in the market? Are we proud of this? Does it also align with our values? Like, Are we happy releasing this into the world? Is it great, or is it just okay? Like you can kind of see that and compare it against a lot of things. And you know what? I also think you can control that 100% in many ways.
Yeah.
Again, doesn't mean it's easy. What you can't control are outcomes. Now, this should be clear. It's not an application of not having accountability towards outcomes and not having goal-driven outcomes as well. But let's say your goal is to hit 10 million in revenue for the year, right? And if you show up every day with a bad attitude, you don't really work well together with the team, the stuff you're putting out there is kind of crap, the likelihood of you hitting 10 million is going to be very
slim
low.
to none.
Slim to none. But if you show up every day, you do the work, however hard it is, you collaborate well, you bring the team together, you have energy and passion, conviction, and the stuff you put out there you think is great, the likelihood of you hitting the 10 million is much higher, but you still can't control it. But because what I've seen in my life is that the moment you release something into the world, you just don't know how it's going to be received. Of course, you have a thesis, you can have data that you base it off and so on, but what happens if a global pandemic suddenly hits? What happens if a war in Ukraine starts? Suddenly inflation is skyrocketing. There's all these factors, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't do the work. And the reason why I think that the future of how you measure performance in individuals and in teams is this split between input, output, and outcome, is because then you can start aligning your behaviors and your values to the end goal of what you're trying to achieve. So what I'm saying is that maybe people's retention, maybe people's salaries, maybe people's bonuses and compensation should be a mix of those three factors. Maybe it's 25% input, the way you show up every day, because now suddenly we're holding you accountable to the behaviors that we expect. Maybe 25% of your bonus or compensation is based on the output, like is it great output? Is it certified? Like does your manager say it's great and so on? But maybe 50% is based on the outcome, because you still should have outcome-based goals, of course, like you're trying to achieve a number and so on, right? It's like hard to be successful if you're not achieving that. But the more aligned your thesis is, your energy is, your ideas are, the more likely you are going to hit that, right? But it's never guaranteed. So I also think it's unfair to only measure people and reward people based on them hitting the number, because sometimes you have people who are doing the best work of their life, they're showing it every day, doing amazing work, and when they release something, it doesn't hit the mark necessarily. And you can say, well, that's because they should have done better. Okay, I've been in many situations, I think we all have, where it's just like something changed in the macro environment, something changed in the competitive environment where you can't control exactly how it was received. We're going to run a marketing campaign. All the focus groups we did said that this is going to be awesome. And then you release it, and suddenly 2 weeks before your competitor releases something that's better, and they're like, you're screwed. There's so many factors that goes into that. And you thinking that you're only going to reward or punish people based on the end of the outcome, I think it also creates a world where you're going to try to cut corners. You're trying to be a little bit political and only shine a light on how good you are and screw everybody else. Like, this doesn't create great team dynamics, because it's all about me versus the outcome for the team. So that's what I mean about it, and I'm focused on writing a lot more about this, because I feel like it's something that has been resonating well when I go out and talk to HR leaders about this, creating this environment where the way you show up every day, the work that you do every day, has to bear equal value to the outcome of what it is that you do. And until we change that, honestly, if I think about some of the companies who've created a lot of toxicity in the world, I bet a lot of it's because they've been chasing growth at all costs.
Oh yeah.
Right? And so you have platforms run amok, companies run amok with no accountability, because, hey, the bottom line looks good, we're growing. It's like, is that the world you want to live in? Is that really inspiring to everybody? I don't think so.
And it never ceases to amaze me how large of a blind eye companies are willing to overlook some of their performers' behavior. I remember consulting a company, and they brought me in to fix one problem, but I kept kind of pulling at that string, and it was all leading to their top performer, their inefficiencies, some of the issues that were going on interdepartmentally. And so, the CEO goes, well, what do you suggest? I said, you need to terminate such and such. He goes, I can't. Our whole company depends on it. And I said, he's going to drag your entire company down. He's toxic. He is not organized. He is putting you guys in deals. Yes, he is throwing revenue, but he's giving away the house. He goes, but it just kind of gets us in the door. So, okay, you paid me for my recommendation. I gave you the recommendation. And they started suffering probably about 2 years later. They started suffering a lot. They had to start letting people go. They kept that person. Finally, he left because they couldn't, pay him as much as he was making before. And as soon as he left, people started coming back, and the company bounced back. Wow. And so I just called it was 4 years later. I called the CEO. I said, "This has been a long time coming, but I told you so." So, it's hard. It's hard whenever you're looking at the revenue.
To learn. Of course,
yeah.
I did the exact same thing. For privacy reasons, I won't mention the name, but I had a star performer who was really good at their job, but they were so toxic, and I got so many complaints about this person. But I was maybe too chicken shit in my career to like do something about it, because I kept thinking about, we're really going to take a performance hit if we do something about this. But then people started leaving because they just didn't want to work with this person. And it's like, I didn't do my duty as a leader to protect the team. And of course, now that I'm older and a little bit more experienced, I'm like, it's always team first. It's always team first. It's never about the individual. I'm always optimizing for the team. Even sometimes when I have to make hard decisions around people's responsibilities or moving people around and so on, it's always about what's best for the team. And it just kind of takes the emotion out of it in some ways, because once you start getting that involved in it, it's really hard. And I was so wrapped up in that point in time in myself having a great career and being seen as a star performer that I thought it would affect me if I let this person go. I was like, it was just stupid.
Yeah. Well, and two, if you've ever served any kind of time in sales, your best salesperson, if you're getting any kind of an override, it doesn't just affect the team; it affects your direct pocketbook. So
it really does.
There's some angst there. I think with a lot of sales leaders, but other leaders, it's just they give a lot of excuses. But I think it kind of gets back to the earlier question of how long do you deal with this particular mindset? For me, it's 6 months.
Same.
And if it's really toxic. First time there's a mistake. Second time it's a behavior. It used to be, I used to say third or fourth time is a behavior. Now it is the second time. So if you correct them, they say they're sorry and they go back and do it, then that's a behavior and you start managing to that behavor. So great point. I appreciate you unpacking those.
I use
a similar
framework.
Great.
I use a similar framework I usually, when somebody says something about somebody who works on my team, my first instinct, honestly, is to protect my team member, because I think there's always like interpersonal dynamics at play. Once I hear two people say something, then I'm like, my antenna certainly goes up, and I'm like, I got to dig a little deeper. When three people goes up, then it's usually there's something about that person that is way off, and I need to deal with, because, and I've become pretty good at that, like that calibrating, But if it's just once, my instinct is naturally more towards protection. Of course, it doesn't mean I can't have a conversation with a person, but it's more around trying to protect my team, because there's always going to be some tensions in companies. I think that's unavoidable in many ways. But yeah, it's now. I mean, that's why I think one of the reasons why we connected so well is I've become so focused there in this part of my career. The thing that gives me the most passion and my biggest focus is how do I create high performance teams that have a lot of joy and purpose behind them, because I want to do well. I'm ambitious. I want everybody who comes and works with me or for me to crush it, but I also want to have fun doing it. I think life is way too short to not. Again, like coming back to what you and I chatted about earlier, doesn't mean it's easy every day or there can't be struggle or tension, but in the grand scheme of things, there should be laughter and joy and a sense of purpose and momentum in your life. Everyone just wins in that way, right? And I mean, like we went through some org changes at Sensei in 2024, and you always see a little bit of dip when that happens in the sentiment and people's motivation, because there's uncertainty. Uncertainty usually breeds some level of discomfort. But then once we got through it and people could see that we were actually coming out of it stronger and the changes made sense, then people were there. But you got to kind of roll with it. You can't expect that every week is going to be just like up and to the right, 10 out of 10, with crushing it.
It doesn't happen
not
that
realistic.
way.
It's just not realistic.
No, a lot of times success looks more like a cardiac arrest on an EKG than it does like a normal, because as soon as you hit that big high, if you've done this enough, like you enjoy the high, but that low is coming. So you're already kind of mentally getting prepared for it. So
that's true.
Well,
so true.
I'd love to move into rapid fire.
Sure.
All right. So what is a book that changed your perspective on business?
I would say the first one that really had a profound impact on me was Purple Cow by Seth Godin. Great book. It's like a marketing book, just like amazing. And then if I can mention another one that changed my life, it's more fiction, but it's written kind of like a business book. It's a Microserves by Douglas Coupland. It's about a group of nerd friends that came out in the mid 90s. About a group of nerd friends who give up everything and move to Silicon Valley and start a company. And obviously that's what I did a few years later. So it really profoundly changed my life. I was very inspired by that book.
I love it. So do you have a favorite podcast or series that you listen to?
Yeah, I would say I listen to the Pivot podcast probably the most religiously. I think it's just great because I love the banter between Kara Swisher and Scott Galloway, and they always inform and entertain in equal measure. I always think the secret of a good podcast is entertainment and information in equal measure. One without the other is kind of useless, I think, long term. I mean, and they do both. I always feel inspired and informed, but also entertained, honestly. And I love also the Smart List podcast is also a great podcast.
Okay, I have to check. I haven't heard about that one. I have to check that one out. So where can people find and engage with you?
LinkedIn is the best place. Just go search for Robin Daniels, the Ryan Reynolds of B2B. That's me. And I don't think if you put in Robin Daniels, you can't really miss me because I share a lot. That's probably the best way. I'm pretty approachable. If you write to me, I usually write back. As long as you're not
you were quick whenever I sent something over. I was kind of surprised. I was like, oh, okay.
Well, I take pride in my LinkedIn. I try to be authentic, and I never have AI write for me or other ghostwriters. I write it all myself, and I respond to everything. As long as you're not trying to sell me an AI SDR tool, I'll be happy to respond back. Because I think my inbox is flooded with half of my inbox is flooded with AI SDR tools coming my way.
You and me both. You and me both. And then I get people that go, the VC funds are interested in your company. I said, okay, well, obviously you didn't research because I don't own Hatchworks AI. That's Brandon Powell. So if you want to talk to him, go message him, leave me alone. So I always like to offer like a mic drop moment. What is one piece of advice or one summary statement that someone listening to this podcast can hear later and go, oh yeah, that was Robin?
Man, life is short. Go out there and take some fucking risks. You will never regret it. You want to live a life full of joy and purpose, but also fulfillment. You don't want to look back on your life and have all these regrets of things you could have, should have, or would have done. So go for it.
Mm-hmm. It's funny. I had a pastor I worked for early in college, and he said, he was kind of morbid. He goes, I've been around a lot of people whenever they pass. I'm doing the last rites and all that. He says, I've never heard anyone afraid of death. I've always heard them remorseful about the memories they didn't make. And that has always stuck with me of going, will I regret not making this memory one day? And it kind of reframes life a little bit. So, Robin, I have thoroughly enjoyed your energy, your insights, and everything. I hope everyone reaches out and connects with you. But thank you for joining. And for everyone else, I will see you on the next episode of The Human Capitalist. Thanks.
Thanks, Trent.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Human Capitalist. This channel is all about community, so comment, subscribe, and join the conversation. This is Trent Cotton, your Human Capitalist, signing off. Remember, invest in yourself, own your potential, and keep building your own human capital. I'll see you next time.